Okay, nobody ever comes up here except me who has a time limit. What's my time limit? Do I got 20, 30, 40 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. There you go.
Whatever time we give him, it takes longer.
There you go. Amen. Okay. It is great to stand here looking at this great looking crowd, and I'm honored to be able to introduce what I think you're going to walk away as a program that you will long remember. How many of you were physically in Vietnam in April of 1975? Stand up. Eva, you were there. Get up. How about you gentlemen over there? Were you there in April of 75? Stand up. You know, after this is over, you may want to come around and ask these people and talk to them to tell their specific story. But I was contacted, as most of you know, I'm a book publisher. I've done 500 books, and I could tell you everyone's great. And I was going to talk about this is the greatest, but I've got an author sitting here and a couple of more authors, so I don't want to hurt their feelings. But anyway, Jason Knowlton is a great guy who called me because he helped write a 4th Division book, and that's the other thing you know about me. I'm a 4th Division guy. But anyway, Jason contacted me and said, Babcock, we have a book we want you to publish. I get those requests all the time. I said, okay. And he sent it to me. The first chapter, I couldn't put it down. That book grabbed me and wouldn't let go, because all of us remember the chaos going on in Saigon and all of Vietnam in 1975 when America turned their back on our allies that our Congress would not fund. So Jason and Eva, who was 3 years old in Saigon when it fell, was living very close to Tan Son Nhut Airport. We have one of our members, is he here, who was flying refugees out during April? That's you, all right. And you're the one in our I'm Ready to Talk book. You're flying a C-141, 130. Okay, same thing they came out on. You went to the Philippines, you're on the way back for another load. They say, Saigon fell, turn around. That's the best story. That's the best story. Your story to me is the best story in my I'm Ready to Talk 2 book. So anyway, Jason and Eva are going to tell you about Uncommon Cargo. The book will be for sale back here at the back. I encourage, books make great gifts, so buy now for Christmas. Jason, you're the first up, right? Thank you. Was that too long?
Jason, welcome, and for the rest of you, Bob just set a record.
There we go.
Okay. How's everybody doing? My name is Jason Knowlton. I got some notes here. So before we start, I want to thank all of you for inviting Eva and I down here. And I said Eva, not Eva. I want everybody to understand it's not Eva, or it's not Eva, it's Eva, like whatever, right? It's an easy way to remember it. So thank you to all of you at AVVBA. It didn't hit me until I walked in here and saw this crowd. It reminded me that it's really important to be around veterans, especially if you are one, and I am one. You don't get to see veterans very much, or at least in my experience, after you've left the military. So these unusual opportunities to get together with a big group of them are just awesome. It's timeless to be a military veteran, I've found. And I don't get to be around too many, so it's great to be around all of you guys today. I also want to thank our Vietnamese friends back here for the awesome meal. I mean, wow. It's no small task to serve a crowd this big, so thanks to all of you for that. So what I want to do here is I want to, before we bring Eva up here to talk, I want to give a little context to kind of tell you how we got to where we are. So I mentioned I'm a veteran. I went to West Virginia, served 20 years in the Air Force, and had 9 assignments. I've been all over the world, like many of you have also. One of my crowning achievements was serving in Afghanistan, which was a very interesting experience. You can see the photo up here. Oh, sorry, I should have advanced the slide. Please advance the slide, thank you. Do one more. Thank you, okay. So this is me in Kabul, Afghanistan, after the Taliban left power and also before they came back. I retired in 2015 as a lieutenant colonel. Uncommon Cargo is not my first book project. Bob's Oracle Society Distinguished Writing Award in 2017, which is kind of cool. But that is how I know Bob. We talked to Bob quite a bit when we were putting everything together for that book, and so we established a relationship now 10 years ago, actually 12 years ago now. So really worked out very well to War with the Fourth. So I retired in 2015, and I'm teaching up at Marietta College in Marietta, Ohio now. So if you'll flip to the next slide, please. All right. So the big question is, why this book? Why this story? And why now? And there's a couple answers to that. For me, it began with an interest in history. And coming up through the ranks and going through the ROTC process, you learn the history of your service, right? And that caught my attention, and what that led to was studying the histories of the other services that we work with, and that became kind of a career-long thing for me. It led to a lot of other things. You know, it led to just researching and reading about the different conflicts that we've been in as a country, and all of that. And so that led to an interest for me in family history and how that family history kind of colors, I guess, for lack of a better term, the larger history of something big that happened, like the Vietnam War, for example. So you'll see just an example of this for me at the top left. Photo here, that is my Uncle Howard, my great Uncle Howard, and you can't read it, but it says, at the console of the outdoor organ, Kufstein, Austria, May 1945. So right when the World War II ended. He was in an infantry unit, but he was also a musician. I remember that from my earliest memories. He was a great piano player. So turns out Kufstein, this place in Austria where he was, had this pipe organ that had been there for I don't know how long, hundreds of years. And so when his unit was occupying the city, he would get up every morning, play the Star-Spangled Banner, and he said he did that to remind the Germans of who was in there, which I thought was kind of funny. But that's where it began, or that's where a lot of this stuff kind of began for me, was this cross-section, this intersection of family and history. So turns out that I was assigned over there for a couple of years. I brought my mom over in 2006, and we drove down to Kufstein, Austria, got a photo of my son in the exact same place 61 years later. And I just think that is the coolest photo. And what better example of family history intersecting with world history. So that was kind of what inspired me to talk to Eva. We met in about 2012. I was on my last duty assignment with the Air Force at the Pentagon at the time. And our sons were in Boy Scouts together. So our kids all became buddies, and we became friends as a result of that as well. But it wasn't until 2014 or so that I learned Eva's family story. And that is that her dad, a South Vietnamese Air Force C-130 pilot, rescued his family and hundreds of others from Saigon on April 29th of 75. And we think that it was probably the last flight out. That's what we believe. So I remember looking at her when she told me all of this, and I said, "My gosh, this is so compelling. We have to write this. We need to publish this or something, because it's got to be preserved. It's such an important story, not just for her family, but for people like us, and really for the younger generations as well." So the initial research of that produced a lot of stories about the escape. And I think one of the most gratifying things about it, and you can see right up here at the lower right, That's the two of us doing Wreaths Across America with our kids, and right above that is some of the work, just a photo of some of the work that we were doing. The guy in the corner there is Tuan Nguyen, which is Eva's uncle. He was 9 years old at the time and is in the book. So he was a big part of everything that we did. I think the most gratifying thing about the whole project really, though, was when we went through this process, the family shared stories with each other that they'd never shared before. And that was really gratifying, and we were able to get a lot of that stuff into the book, which was great. If you could advance the slide, please. Okay. So the other reason why now and why this story is because this is a unique perspective. So, you know, Vietnam is in our culture going way back to the end of the war, frankly. And most of the media that we see, at least in the Western world, about Vietnam is really seen through the lens of the U.S. military out there, right? So films, you got Platoon, you got Apocalypse Now. Even Forrest Gump had a component where he served in combat in Vietnam. Full Metal Jacket, Good Morning Vietnam. Television, you had China Beach with Dana Delaney. Some of you guys might remember that. There was also one called Tour of Duty, which was in the 80s. That was another one that was out there. We got books, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, Dog Soldiers. Maybe some of you have read that. Documentaries. Has everybody seen Last Days in Vietnam? It is outstanding, by Rory Kennedy. It's about 100 or an hour and 15-minute documentary film about April 1975. It's fantastic. But again, told through the lens primarily of people like us. So Uncommon Cargo is really unique because there aren't a whole lot of stories out there about Vietnam that are told through the folks that were there, that are native to Vietnam. And so Eva's family was. And so when she told me her story, I thought it's compelling. It's also unique because we don't hear these voices very often. But really, their stories are just as dramatic as the ones we're familiar with, if not more. So if you'll turn the slide, please. So this is what it's about to me. We focus on three themes here for this book, and it's sacrifice, survival, and hope. These are three key themes for us. And I'm going to let Eva talk to you about what that means for her family. So please welcome Eva Wynn Whitfield.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Well, first of all, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for lowering it. There you go. Yes. It's a tremendous honor to be here. I view this as a very humbling invitation, so thank you for letting us join you today. Just to set the stage, for the next few minutes, I'm just going to share a little bit more about my family in hopes that just to humanize it and just so you can see it from at least one family's perspective. So let me start by introducing you. Oh, can we click, please? Skip. There you go. One slide. There you go. All right. So let me start by introducing you to my immediate family. All right. So here in this picture, believe it or not, it's about 50 years old. Right. And this was taken a few weeks before the fall of Saigon in April of 75. So let me tell you who's who in this photograph. So that's me there, not in the white dress, but in the yellow shirt and the striped pants with the very short hair. Okay. So I am 3 years old, all right, as Bob had mentioned earlier. I'm being held by my father. His name is Zhao. He was a South Vietnamese pilot who flew C-130s, right? And then next to us, you'll see my younger brother, Zhong. He was 18 months at the time and being held by my mother, Mai. So I think the picture says it all, but we were a really happy family. It was, yes, dangerous. There was tumultuous times, but we had a really good life. So I just wanted to share that, and really those are the main characters that are featured in the book. So I treasure this photograph because it's actually the last photograph we have taken together as a family. All right, click please. All right, so I'm going to focus on my dad, my late dad. This is a picture of my father, Zhao. It is perhaps one of my most prized possessions. We didn't have a lot of photographs. I mean, we did, but you're fleeing, you don't actually pack a lot. So it's a handful of them that we have, and it's my favorite picture of him. So some people say I look a lot like him. I would agree. So to the right of his photograph, what you're looking at is his certificate of training that he got when he came to Texas in 1972. He was training with the United States Air Force to get his C-130 pilot instructor training out of the way, which I heard he really enjoyed. Now, everything I've been told from my mother, he loved being a pilot, right? That was just his passion. And as I mentioned, he was actually a lieutenant colonel in the South Vietnamese Air Force. Now, unfortunately, he represents the sacrifice portion, right, of the three themes that Jason mentioned. Growing up here in the United States, I didn't really fully grasp the, I guess, impact of his absence in my life until I probably got older, right? And definitely more so when I had my own two sons. I've lost count of the times over the years where I said, what if he had made it? What if he had made it? Unfortunately, he did not make it. But what he sacrificed that day ensured that we were able to survive so we could see a brighter future. I wish that I could have known him. I wish that my two sons could have known him. But my hope in sharing this story with you today and with others, that in some very small way, we can honor his memory, right? And just keep it alive. So click, please, Skip. Next, I want to tell you a little bit about my late grandparents. My grandfather Hong and my grandmother Dat. They truly were the rocks of our family. So just to give you some context and background of what life was like, my grandfather was an architect, and he owned a rubber plantation that was near the Cambodian border. He actually sold to big American companies like Michelin, right, for tires. And I remember my mom and my uncles and aunts telling us stories. Imagine this rubber plantation. It is the jungle, right? There's nothing out there but trees and animals, and obviously the rubber trees. But they would occasionally go there, spend the night, and apparently nobody slept a wink because you could hear tigers growling in the jungle, right? They were, up high and, on these stilts, so they were safe. But they were up all night because they could just hear the wildlife. But in the mornings, they could see the footprints of the animals, right, around where they were staying. My grandfather Hong, who I absolutely adored and just cherished, he was the ultimate breadwinner for the family. So you'll see a picture shortly. He had 8 kids, and he also supported his siblings and his parents as well. So I guess knowing that, I could understand why it was so hard for him, actually why he refused to leave with us the day that Saigon fell. He was not ready to give up his country that he loved. He was not ready to give up his livelihood or social status. Now, next to him, all 4 feet 10 inches tall is my grandmother. She was a Spitfire. She was the one, though, that took care of the entire family. Everybody, she wasn't large, but big in stature, but you knew not to, do anything that she wasn't going to approve of. She was the constant in our lives. She really was that glue, the glue that really held us together. And never once did I hear her complain when we were growing up about our situation when things were tough, about anything. All she cared about was, how do I keep my family together? How do we keep them united? That's all that really mattered to her. Together, they raised a really close-knit family that took care of each other then and now. Okay, click. Now, not only do we survive in Saigon, but we actually thrive there. So in Vietnamese culture, especially in the era of that day, it's very common for many generations to live in one house. So that's actually a picture of me being held by my grandmother, and she's, my two uncles, her two sons, and her two grandsons were actually standing in front of our house in Saigon, which is about 2 miles from Tan Son Nhut Airport. And what you see there is the house that we lived in, and guess what? It actually still stands today. It's now a government office building. So there was always a lot going on in that house, as you can imagine, right? Lots of commotion, a lot of action, but that's how we liked it. The other thing I learned during this process and talking with the family was throughout the Vietnam War, we would rent out space in that house to Americans. We believed they were CIA. They never went in and said, hey, I'm CIA, but they put a bunch of antennas up on the roof, and then before they left, they burned the equipment and all the documents in trash cans. On a lighter note, though, they were the ones, one of them, by a gentleman named Dario, he introduced my family to grilled cheese sandwiches for the very first time. And they would never forget it. And he also, from what I understood, would slip me M&Ms, right, when the parents weren't looking. And I'm pretty sure that's where I got my sweet tooth. So, but those were definitely treasured times. Click, please. Now, in this picture, you can see my grandmother, Dad, with her 8 kids. They had 5 girls first, right, in that order, and then 3 boys. It's probably not a surprise, but, in Vietnamese culture and other cultures as well, it was really important to have a son to carry on that family name. So you better believe when my Uncle Sonny was born, the first male, right, child, it was a very joyous day. He was treated like royalty, a king from day one. My understanding was he had fancy formula, apples shipped in from France, and all of his sisters would stand around hoping, they could get a slice or two, but apparently he was a really big eater and he would not want to share. Okay. But it's okay. They were very still tight-knit, and they are to this day, then and now. Go ahead and click. So now that you kind of get a feel, right, for what my family was like, what our life was like, let me take you to the beginning, the very beginning of our new life here in the United States. So after our escape from Saigon, in a matter of weeks, we went from Saigon to Thailand, to Guam, to Hawaii, to San Diego, and then we ended up in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, where we were getting processed for processing. And it happened pretty quickly. So you're actually looking at my refugee card at the very top there, okay? And that's my Uncle Tuan below. Remember, he was 9 years old when that Jason mentioned earlier. Now, he was the youngest of those 8 kids, and we're only 6 years apart, so I always viewed him as my older brother. We're very close. As you can see, I have a pretty big smile on my face. I'm too young at this point to realize that my father would never be joining us. Okay, so one of the questions I get asked quite a bit is, yeah, you were 3 years old, you were very young. Do you have any memory or recollection? And I do have one vivid memory. I used to think that it was a recurring dream that I had when I was growing up, until I told my mom about it one day in elementary school. But the memory is I'm in the C-130, cargo bay, and I see a sea of black hair all around me. Everybody's huddled together. It's really loud. There's a lot of crying. And I come to find out later, the reason why it was so loud is it was missing the man door, right? And there was a sheet on that doors, and that's why we flew so low. But we made it to Thailand, fortunately. Okay, so I'm going to take you to a little brief history about what happened. If you mind clicking one more time. There you go. So after Fort Chaffee, what happened? So as I mentioned, we weren't there very long. We were fortunate in that case. So we headed to our final destination, which is Falls Church, Virginia. All right. So if you guys have been to Virginia, it's roughly about 20 minutes, 30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., just to give you an idea. So the reason why we ended up in Falls Church, Virginia is because my mother's cousin was married to an American, David Payne, who lived in Falls Church. So that's how we ended up there. And all 8 of us lived in their house for a couple of months. And then not too long after that, Falls Church Presbyterian Church came into the picture, and they sponsored our family. So we owe them so much. I'm still in awe of this today, but how is it somebody could welcome you, they don't know you, you're complete strangers, but yet they're doing everything they can to help you. And by this I mean they gave us food, they gave us clothes, and even a home to live in next to the church for the first year and a half. So, sorry, I said to myself I wouldn't get emotional. So, I even learned how to ride a bike in that church parking lot. And so there were good memories there. And many years later, I even got married at the same church, even though we had moved away from the area. So it's always will be and has been near and dear to my heart. But to this day, I'm still in awe of that generosity and support. We could not have rebuilt our lives without that community help from Falls Church Presbyterian. In this family picture, what you're looking at is the day that my grandfather made it to the United States after fleeing Saigon. He actually made it by boat. He was one of the first boat people. And that's the picture that represents when he arrived. And in that back row, you can see some of our church sponsors who we became close with. But they were there to warmly welcome him that very momentous day. And a few of them we became very close with. So in the very back, the gentleman that you can see in the very back, he has a little bit of red, and he's to the far left. That is retired Brigadier General Hamlin. So he was in the Army, and he was always there for all the big moments in our lives. I cherish a memory of him coming with me and my brother Trung when we became U.S. citizens. And he also was there for other big moments in my life, such as my wedding. So speaking of big moments, I want to take this opportunity to thank this great country. I don't think there is any other like it. When our family was in our most desperate time of need, it was the United States of America and its citizens that welcomed our family and helped us to rebuild our lives. My hope in sharing this story with you and others is that it reminds people of the tremendous, tremendous good within the United States and with Americans. And in fact, one of the main reasons why I wanted to be here today is I never knew how I could publicly thank the Vietnam veterans whom I've never met, who defended our freedom in Saigon, who helped us to rebuild our lives at Fort Chaffee, and who supported us in our local community. You made this blessed life for me and my family possible. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifices. Thank you for giving us hope when we needed it the most so we could strive for a better future. We're eternally, eternally grateful. Thank you very much.
We're going to open it up for Q&A here. if you guys have any questions for Eva, I've got one I can lead off with. I want to. She gets asked a lot about what the most difficult part of adjusting to their new life here was. So, can you tell the audience, Eva, what was the most difficult part for your family, and how did they adapt?
So I think that because the family was not united, right, we all left at different times. And so it took probably another 12 years after we arrived before everybody was out of Vietnam. So I talked about in the book, obviously, the people that did escape, but what we don't get into is the people that were left behind, such as my grandfather, my aunt and uncle. He was a Marine, so he ended up in a re-education camp for a number of years. So until we were united, it's like you just feel like you're not a piece of a whole, right? You're not a whole yet. And yeah, as I mentioned, my father did not make it, so he was a pilot. So I don't know if people are aware, but when pilots, they have their uniforms, they have a lot of zippers, and he had put money, gold, everything into all of his pockets. And according to my mom, it was stuffed to the rim, right? Because he just wanted us to have a good start once we arrived. But because he didn't make it, we literally just had the clothes on our back. So I think just having to start over, as I mentioned, we had a really good life. So when you have all that and you have to come here and you don't know the language, and you're missing parts of your family. So, and I don't know if it was mentioned earlier, but it took us 10 years to write this book. And it took 40 years for my family to actually start talking about it. Nobody wants to talk about tragedy. But in the process of doing it, I can tell you, at least for me, and for my mom especially, it was very therapeutic and freeing. And I really hope that by sharing this story with you, it will encourage others. We're just one family, and I know there have been others that have very similar, if not more difficult struggles. And let me tell you something about myself. I am very private, right? I have to tell you, it's hard to get up here and talk about it. So I'm shedding my protective armor because I think there's a greater good in sharing.
Great story, and thank you so much. I, like probably a number of people here, spent some time in those rubber plantations along the Cambodian border, and you're not kidding about the tigers either. What happened to your grandfather? How did he get out?
So, as I mentioned, he did get out eventually after 2 years, and my understanding is he got out in the nick of time. I don't know if he was trying to bribe people to kind of not be imprisoned, but the day he left, they came looking for him, and they had, my understanding is, a binder of all of the things that he did wrong against the communist government. So he probably would have been thrown in prison, and who knows what would have happened. But when he left by boat, and when I say boat, it's tiny. I mean, I don't think you'd even want to go out on your local lake, much less the ocean with it. But he didn't tell his parents. I think he told his one trusted uncle who dropped him off in the dark of night. And they ended up, fortunately, being discovered by an Italian tanker floating, all right, near Brunei. And they gave him food and water. And so it's honestly, I think it's a miracle he made it.
We love what you've shared, but could you take a minute and tell us a little bit more about the actual flight, your last flight, and when you took off, and were there any more flights after that, and where did you land, and what was the situation with your dad that you've mentioned that he didn't make it, but can you share, put in more light on that?
Absolutely, but I will say spoiler alerts. Okay, so it's obviously, but I'll share it with you. So I was 3. I have a lot of memory. Jason Knowlton, who's my co-author, he did a lot of research, and we do believe we know one flight made it out that day. And what I didn't get into earlier was the only reason why this plane was probably still flyable and hasn't been destroyed, it was hidden in a hangar for repairs. And remember I mentioned the man door was missing? That was probably one of the reasons. But because my father was the C-130 pilot, he knew it was there. And so it tucked away. But there was a lot of shelling. And Jason, is it strafing? Is that the right term? Going on at Tanzanite Airport. So things were destroyed. There was nothing left to even fly. And we were 2 miles from the airport, but it took my father a long time to actually get through the streets to us and then back to the airport. And I understand as we flew low, but when we took off, I think it was in the afternoon of April 29th. And we landed in Thailand just for, refueling or whatever. And everybody assumed my mom was on that flight, me, my brother, my grandmother, and my 3 uncles, who ranged in age from 9 to 13. And when we arrived in Thailand, people were getting off the plane probably just to rest and probably they're refueling. My grandmother overheard other passengers from that plane talking, saying, "Oh, that's so sad. Did you see that poor pilot was shot?" And so she did not tell my mother because she knew that if she did, she wouldn't have gone on further in the journey, and she was afraid she would keep me and my brother there. So, and it's in the book, but also when we did the interviews, my uncle, the 13-year-old, and my mom saw my father walk up to the cockpit of the plane. That was the last time they saw him. So that's, obviously nobody knows for sure what happened, but those are the things that we could piece together based upon those family interviews.
Thank you for sharing your story. What happened to other family members that were left, and have you been back?
Yes. So the good news is we did get reunited, remember there was 8 kids. So fortunately, a lot of the sisters were studying abroad. So they were in Australia or in Europe. The family that took the longest to get out was the eldest. And it's because I mentioned she was married to the Marine. She could have left with us that day, but he couldn't leave. And so she was going to stay along with her 2 sons. But I remember my grandmother sending money home year after year, right? Always making sure that was the dream. I left when I was 3. I did not meet my aunt again until I was 12. And they actually fled. It took them 3 times by boat. But they made it, and they ended up in the Philippines, and we got reunited. So it had a happy ending. And I'm sorry, you had another. Yes. So in 2017, we took my mom back, along with my 2 sons and my husband Scott. It was kind of bittersweet for her, because you kind of go back and you revisit. But I think it was a really wonderful trip. We spent 2 weeks there, and we went and saw our old house. It's still standing there, but yeah.
Did you ever find out the names of the pilots who flew the C-130?
My mom had a first name, and she said his name was Min. But guess what? His last name is Nguyen, which is that's 40% of the Vietnamese population. So, unfortunately, we just lost touch because everybody's scattered to the 4 winds, right? You don't know where they are, and time is kind of against you in this sense, because now that we're ready to talk about it, and I'd love to connect the dots. I think even our sponsor, General Hamlin, he passed away, so that's why I think it's so important to talk about this and document this before it's lost to time.
I would also add too, with regard to the crew on the plane, when we were just prior to actually publishing the book, Bob here went out on the internet and was looking around for, I think, just photos of C-130s, I think is what it was. And he ran across a photo of a static display C-130 at Little Rock Air Force Base in Arkansas. And there's a placard next to it, and it says, "This is the last airplane that left Saigon on the 29th. And so that naturally got our attention. So we've done a little bit of check-in. We don't know all the details, but the official Air Force history of that tail number does have a history attached. It's similar to Eva's story. And so we don't know how to connect the two, but we believe that it was the last flight out that day and that airplane is now on display in Arkansas. Any other questions?
Do you know where your grandfather's rubber plantation is located?
I just know it was close to the Cambodian border, but I don't know the exact. But apparently, it was hundreds of acres. It was huge. He actually had two plantations. He had one that was near Saigon, but unfortunately, it was destroyed by Agent Orange, and then he ended up buying the larger one. It's much further out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, yes. So remember the 9-year-old uncle, Tuan? That's him. So he was a captain in the Marine Corps, and that's me with him. So yeah, great. I should have mentioned that. Thank you.
Any other questions? What's your favorite part of the book, Eva?
So there's actually not one specific scene, but my three uncles that I mentioned, between the ages of 9 and 13, they were absolute troublemakers. And so there's a little bit of stories weaved throughout of the antics they would play within the house. And I love that because even though it was a crazy time, they were still kids and they were still happy. So for example, we had a water tank at the top of the house. That's where, you get your cooking water, your washing, for showers. And on really hot days, they thought it was a really awesome idea to go and swim in that water tank and kick up all the water. And so when they were cooking, they'd be like, the boys are up in the water tank because the water was all muddy. But they were constantly doing things like that, or lighting up firecrackers and, warring with the neighborhood kids. But I don't know, it always warms my heart.
Okay, so you can talk a little bit about what we got coming up. And Bob, you mentioned a few things that we'd already done, so we have a few other things. Where do you see this going?
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, Bob made our dream come true by publishing this book. So I feel like everything from here is just the silver lining. But I recently did a podcast, and the interviewer was like, "Oh, I can see this as a potential movie one day." So you know what? I'm just going to put it out there. But I would love to see, potentially that happen, just to have underrepresented voices to be shown on a grand scale. So it encourages others to also share their stories.
Anybody here work for Netflix?
Bob, do you need another time limit?
Yeah, no, we don't need a time frame. I tell you what, folks, you have gotten a taste of how this book grabs you. The story. When we found out, Jason and I, about this C-130 in Little Rock, Arkansas, outside the Air Force Base, between the two of us, we're going to figure that one out and see if that's actually the airplane. Another question I have of you, have you ever been back to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas? I grew up 40 miles from Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and in 1968, I was a filler lieutenant after I'd been to Vietnam at Fort Chaffee training with the Louisiana National Guard. And that was when Bobby Kennedy was killed. We did riot control training. If you ever been to the National Guard, the question, which is the biggest mob, the National Guard or the mob? So, but seriously, you can see why I am so fired up by this book. I guarantee you, if you got something to do the rest of the week, don't start reading it today because you're not going to put it down.
Bob? One of the unique things about sitting up here and being able to look out at all of you while we have guest speakers speaking is I get a pretty quickly can gauge how much attention you're all paying, and your eyes were riveted on Jason and Eva as they spoke. So I know it hit home. Come on in a little closer. One of the things that we, the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association, like to do is say thank you to all of our speakers. So on behalf of all of our Vietnam veterans, let me present you each with, this is a challenge coin, unique to the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association. It won't get you on the subway, but it should look nice on the wall. And these two books, I'm Ready to Talk, are our stories, written little vignettes by all the members who are out here and several others. Perhaps they'll make good reading for you when the time comes. And thank you so much once again for coming and speaking with us.
Thank you.